This is Beyond the Culture. Let's go. I'm so excited that you took the time to join us on the next episode of Beyond the Culture. This is the show where we embrace change and challenge cultural norms and ideals. I'm your host, Dr. David Walker. I have an outstanding show today. I am going to be talking to a young lady by the name of Jennifer Jones Austin. And we're going to have an exciting conversation, and I'm so glad that you joined in today. But let me just tell you about Jennifer. Let me just introduce her to you and just tell you a little bit about her. Jennifer Jones Austin, Esquire, is a fourth generation leader of faith and social justice. She is a child and family advocate. She is CEO and executive director of the Federation of Protestant Welfare Agencies, and that is an anti-poverty policy and advocacy organization with human service agencies operating throughout New York City. She's also a wife and a mother, and she is the author of Consider It Pure Joy. So I am super excited to have Jennifer Jones Austin with me today. So I'd like to welcome you to the show. Welcome, Jennifer.
Thank you, Dr. Walker. I don't know if you can tell, but I'm smiling like ear to ear and ecstatic to be here. Really grateful for the opportunity to come on and to share and to converse with you. Really
Well,
excited about it.
yes, so I am super excited about you being here, and I'm just looking forward to this conversation today.
Same here.
All right, so I want to start with something that's something that I shared with you a little bit earlier today when we were having a conversation, that I knew your father. I knew your father, and your father is the Reverend Dr. William Augustus Jones. And he was the pastor of Bethany Baptist Church, that's in Brooklyn, New York. And so you and I have something in common. Your father was a pastor. My father was a pastor. And of course, anytime your father's a pastor, you're known as a PK.
That's right.
Yeah, and in case somebody doesn't know what a PK is, that means a preacher's kid. And so I want to ask you, as we start this conversation, what was your experience like growing up as a PK?
So, my experience growing up as a PK is probably in some ways similar, but in many other ways dissimilar to the experience, the kind of typical experience of a PK. And the reason being that, let me back up and say similar in that, you know, church every Sunday,
Mhm.
that was the number one priority. Remembering who you are and whose you are. To uphold your name. Sunday school was not a, do I have to, but rather, yes, you will be there
Uh-huh.
participating in, all of the, church activities for children, spending Sunday all day in church. Very similar in that respect, right? That is the story of a PK kid.
Right.
I believe it was dissimilar in this very, very, very significant respect.
Hmm.
Not only am I a PK, I am a GPK. I
Oh.
am a GGPK. So I am a preacher's kid, I
Uh-huh.
am a grand preacher's kid, and I am a great grand preacher's kid.
Wow.
What that means is that my father, as a PK and
Hmm.
a GPK, knew what it was like to live under, the strictest of rules,
Sure.
knew what it was like to have eyes on you at every turn and everybody telling you who you are and how you must show up in the world, and a lot of demands and expectations being placed upon you. And I believe that because he grew up with that in his own household, he gave his children more more independence,
Okay.
more latitude. He, set parameters, but he allowed us to challenge, to push, to question,
Okay.
and frankly, to step out of line um, without, the judgment of God coming down upon us.
Sure.
And so I think I grew up maybe with a little more freedom and understanding
Okay.
than PKs sometimes grow up with.
Listen, that sounds like a blessing because the rest of us didn't have it that way or that good.
I remember one time, I think I went to a party or something, and I came home late at night
Okay.
in my teenage years. And I'll never forget my father coming into my bedroom and kissing me on my forehead and saying to me, "Be careful,"
Okay.
and walking out the door. Now that is not the typical response that a PK
Uh-huh.
in a traditional preacher's household might get from the preacher.
Right, right. But I guess, but that's wisdom though.
That's wisdom. That's
Abs-
wisdom based on experience.
Absolutely. Let me ask you this. So your father was also known for civil rights and social justice. And as I introduced you, I introduced, a part of social justice being a part of your background. And so, how did your father influence what you do now? And was he your influence?
Absolutely. So I was influenced in many ways by him. Some ways were very intentional
Okay.
and very obvious, and others were just by him being who he was, and that rubbing off on me.
Okay.
He was in many ways, he and my mother, both very real and active role models. I'll never forget when dating my husband and him just learning about my parents, but not having met them and not having yet had an opportunity to get to know them. He said to me, "You place your parents up on pedestals." And I said, "That's because that's exactly where they belong."
Wow.
My father and mother both taught me that it was very important to pursue your passion
Okay.
and live your calling,
Okay.
to find purpose in your life and then be in hot pursuit of it.
Okay.
And so having a father who was a faith leader and who really, really believed in and practiced, the words is found in Matthew 25,
Mm.
where Jesus essentially admonishes the disciples, that what you do to the least of these, you do unto me, that God would sit and have that judgment upon them. I saw in him someone who, at every turn,
Hmm.
believed that his responsibility was to the community at large, not just the people who were in his congregation, but that as a leader of faith, as a disciple of Christ, that
Hmm.
his responsibility was to preach and teach and outreach to all in the community,
Okay.
and was to lift up the community and the challenges that beset the community. And so, when you're raised with that model and it is, ever present in
Hmm.
everything that person does, you can't help but realize that that's a part of your responsibility and your role in this world. You can't help but appreciate that, living your best life is in part about helping others live their best lives. And so I think that, again, intentionally and unintentionally, he modeled a lot just by the way he showed up in the world. I saw my father never turn away
Hmm.
somebody who was in need.
Okay.
Whether, he could have been sitting in a restaurant and someone walked up to him and asked for help and he immediately provided it.
Okay.
I remember on Sunday afternoons, as he was, dealing with the affairs of the church, I'd sit behind his big desk and I love to pick up the pieces of paper on his desk, letters written by people with needs and challenges. My son has been incarcerated and, is in jail and is facing trial, and I don't have an attorney. My husband has a substance abuse problem, and we're going to be evicted from our home because we haven't paid the rent. My child is presenting with some mental health challenges, and I don't know what to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I watched him
Okay.
connect people as a faith leader, connect people to the services and the supports that they needed. I watched him go to court and be that, that witness or that validator for someone who was struggling, who was, facing, charges for something.
Okay.
And so I think he taught me by example that is your responsibility to, to be available to anybody and everybody. The last thing I'll say about that is that he was very much in demand. He, people often talk about his preaching prowess,
Mm-hmm.
and he preached the world over. Preached, on all continents. Yes, he even preached in the Antarctica.
Wow.
He would say, whether it is, St. John the Divine or St. Patrick's Cathedral or the Washington National Cathedral, or whether or not it's the assembly of, like in Hong Kong, the assembly of churches. If the small storefront in Red Bank, New Jersey, has asked me to speak on this particular day or evening,
Mm-hmm.
I'm unavailable to the rest of them.
Wow.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So by that example, again, whether intentional or unintentional, he taught me that your responsibility is to your community,
Okay.
and that you have to show up and give of yourself the best that you can. So I think that that's how he influenced me.
You just said that he told you or taught you it was important to show up for your community. And so as I introduced you, we talked about you being, involved with social justice. So I really want to ask you, what is social justice to you? And why do you see it that way? What is social justice to you, and why do you see it that way?
Absolutely. So in years past, and this is a great example of how, like with age comes wisdom, and
Mm-hmm.
hopefully we're always in a mode of continual learning and growth.
Sure.
And I guess maybe in my early 20s, I was in law school, went to law school not because I wanted to be a lawyer per se,
Okay.
but because I realized I needed another degree. And I didn't know what I wanted to do or be in life. So I was in my very early 20s, like 2021. And my uncle, who was a civil rights attorney, advised me to go to law school. He actually said to me, go to law school, and while you're there, you'll figure it out. And then he went on to say that if you don't, that's okay, because people think that lawyers can do anything short of practicing medicine. And the truth is that he couldn't have been more right about that. That is, people think that if you're a lawyer, you can think about anything and do anything
Mm-hmm.
except operate on somebody. So I went to law school, and in I guess it was the second year of law school, while searching for a law review note topic, I happened upon a case of a young man who was tried and convicted for murder. He was 16 at the time. And the circumstances of the murder appeared, just, objectively speaking, to be premeditated.
Okay.
He killed his father. At sentencing time, the judge opined that the jury had misunderstood the evidence presented,
Mm-hmm.
that in fact the young man had acted in self-defense, or as he believed was self-defense. He'd endured so many years of physical and emotional abuse at the hands of his father,
Okay.
that there came a time when he really believed his father was going to kill him. And so even though he killed his father while his father lay sleeping,
Mm-hmm.
he thought he was acting in self-defense because he'd endured so much abuse. That case opened up my eyes, my mind, my heart to the experiences of young people who endure years and years of physical and emotional abuse at the hands of people who love them.
Okay.
And I found myself desirous of learning as much as I could about the experiences of people who were abused to the point of being traumatized and believing that they're always at risk of their lives being in peril at the hands of people who are to love them and care for them. And that just opened me up to a whole different understanding about the experiences who've been abused and people who abuse them.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden, I began to feel like God was calling me to do this work, to work on behalf of his vulnerable children and to engage in issues of child abuse and neglect, foster care and adoption. And so that became my social justice. I was going to, stand in the gap for
Mm-hmm.
children experiencing severe abuse and neglect. And I did that for many years. And then I began to appreciate that the people who commit abuse of their children, people who neglect their children,
Mm-hmm.
aren't really like the devil. They're not like ugly, nasty, mean-spirited, evil people.
Okay.
In most instances, they are people who've been broken themselves, broken by intergenerational poverty, broken by mental health,
Mm-hmm.
people who themselves have suffered domestic violence and child abuse, people who become involved with the substance abuse, and that has affected their way of engaging with their children. And all of a sudden, I realized you cannot really affect positive and sustainable change for children who become involved with foster care and adoption if you're not looking at the entirety of the family
Mm-hmm.
and the experiences that families who struggle have. And so my appreciation to have a broader social justice frame and approach, was what was, I guess it was birthed. And I realized that my work had to be about
Mm-hmm.
addressing poverty for the family, addressing the stressors that attend, communities that are impoverished. And then, of course, you can, if you do the work and you understand, you realize that in America, and especially in urban environments, poverty
Mm-hmm.
goes hand in hand with race,
Okay.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And so there has to be a racial justice element to your work of fighting poverty, right? You cannot separate the two.
Okay.
And as I continue to evolve, I grew to appreciate you also have to center on criminal justice
Okay.
because in our society, the three are inextricably linked. Race, poverty, and justice involvement all go hand in hand. In New York City, where I am, the 10 community districts with the highest rates of poverty also just happen to be the community districts with the highest rates of race, Black and brown people, and justice involvement. And so as I have grown and matured in this work, I've come to appreciate that my work in social justice has to be centered on race and poverty and all of its intersections, including justice involvement.
It's interesting that you tie those together, and because there's so many people who would try to argue against exactly what you said, because they don't see it, they try to use other means to justify causes or not to be able to put a finger on why things are the way they are, especially when it comes to, like you say, poverty, race, and what was the third?
Justice involvement.
Justice involvement. And so it's interesting that you went into that particular area. So when you say you become a child and family advocate, how has that gone? Tell us about the impact you think you've made in that particular area.
So let me first say that I am the first to tell you that whatever impact I've had,
Okay.
it's only beginning to scratch the surface, and that there is so much more work to be done.
Okay.
First and foremost, I believe that that God has given me a platform to speak to these issues, and I think that that's impact alone. you know, said differently,
Okay.
as we have, in 2020 had to confront, the COVID pandemic
Mm-hmm.
and the economic pandemic borne out, like from the COVID pandemic, and now the resurgence or the reawakening, the reckoning around our racial pandemic. What I've sought to do is to help people understand and appreciate that in this moment we can do all the talking, all the protesting, all the marching
Mm-hmm.
around excessive use of force and over policing and quote defunding the police.
Mm-hmm.
But if we're not looking at how racism presents and is pervasive in all of our other institutions and structures, whether it be education or housing, healthcare, mental health care, politics, income and wages, wherever we have systems and structures, we have racism, and it is allowed to persist. So one, using my voice, and as my daddy taught me,
Mm-hmm.
appreciating that our allegiance should not be to the flag, but to God,
Mm-hmm.
and moving on behalf of His people. Using my voice in whatever platforms that I'm able to occupy, like this one, to speak to those issues and to do it in a conversational way. I believe that that has had value add and has been able to have impact. Then there's some very concrete things that I have been able to do over the course of my career. Everything from achieving legislation centered on approaching issues of poverty and wealth and income enhancement through a racial equity frame,
Mm-hmm.
looking at the experiences of low income people and advancing legislation for minimum wage, helping to lead that movement here in New York State, but also looking at career ladder opportunities for low income persons of color and advancing legislation and work around that, achieving pay equity
Mm-hmm.
in certain professions that many Black and brown persons are in, like childcare, where Black and brown people have been paid significantly less for doing the same job
Mm-hmm.
as people in public school education settings. And so advancing that work to today, serving as the chair of the Board of Correction for the City of New York with a mandate that I presented to the City of New York that we end solitary confinement.
Okay.
And we're in the process of doing just that. And so, some of it is behind the scenes and some of it is really policy wonky.
Mm-hmm.
And then some of it you can feel and appreciate because it really does impact people on a day-to-day basis.
You know, there's been a lot of conversation about, diversity and inclusion. And, if you just be more diversified and include more, it's going to change systems. Now, of course, there's some who are full in with diversity and inclusion. And then there are some people who are in the most important position, like CEOs of the organization, who will sometimes put that kind of movement. So what would you say about diversity and inclusion? And also, what would you offer as solutions? Because you've mentioned race, and race is a major issue. What would you suggest are solutions to bridge this gap that we have?
So someone very close to me, extremely close to me, who for that person's protection, I won't call that person's name,
Okay.
but somebody who has long worked in the corporate space and in leadership in the corporate space. This person often tells me every time a Black person is appointed to a chief people officer's position, chief diversity and inclusion officer position, this person's response has been everybody gets excited,
Mm-hmm.
and he says to me, there's no real power there. Um, he says, those people are put in place to have programs to help hire people for key roles. They are the people who are sent out to speak on behalf of the company about the work that they're doing that's centered on diversity and inclusion, but they're not the people
Mm-hmm.
who are in the positions where they are bringing in the revenues, or they're doing product development, or they're speaking to government affairs, things that will change legislation and policy. They're kind of a face. And so you'll look and say, well, there are more people who are in the company, but why haven't we moved the needle on achieving real voice at the table?
Mm-hmm.
Or change that really looks impactful in the organization or in the organization's products. And at first, I thought that person was being, negative and and cynical. And as I've looked at it, I've thought to myself, yeah, there've been a lot of people appointed to these D&I roles over the last 15 to 20 years, but somehow we have fewer persons of color serving in key leadership positions today than we did 15, 20 years ago.
Okay.
What's up? I believe that until we see Black and brown persons in key policy making and product development roles in these organizations, and until we see CEOs in these organizations that really are willing to bring their whole selves
Mm-hmm.
to work,
Mm-hmm.
right? I mean, a lot of us have learned a lot about code switching through the years.
Absolutely.
And there's certain things we can do and cannot do in the workplace if we are to get ahead in advance. So you can have a Black person, whether it be in a company or been in a nonprofit or even in government, occupying a seat. But are they bringing their whole selves
Mm-hmm.
to work is the real question. And so I'm challenging in this moment people to move beyond this whole D&I.
Okay.
And to say, what does it really mean to be race conscious when it comes to our policies and our practices,
Mm-hmm.
when it comes to how we interface and who gets to sit at the table and whose voice matters. And it has to be more than, did we reach, do we have better than 30% diversity in the leadership team or better than 5% diversity?
I want to shift for just a minute, if I could. I want to talk about something serious and very important to you. As we all know that recently, Chadwick Boseman, most of us know him as the Black Panther, and many other films that he starred in, and he was an excellent actor. And of course, at his passing, I did a Boseman binge. I watched about 5 or 6 of his movies because I wanted to honor his celebrity. And in the short life that he had, I think he was excellent.
Yes.
And he'll go down in history,
yes.
Just because of the impact that he had. And but unfortunately, we heard that he passed from a 4-year battle with colon cancer. And from all reports, it was very private for him. There were even people who will say we were around him and we didn't even know. You may have even seen him have lost weight, but no one knew that that was the issue. And so it was a private thing for him. And I bring him up because as I was doing my research and I was on your bio, I came across the fact that you also are a cancer survivor. And you were stricken with an acute form of leukemia that required a bone marrow transplant to increase your chances of survival. And from all that I read, you were at, as they say, death's door. So I'd love for you to share the story about your cancer survival and what happened in order for you to recover.
Absolutely. Before I do that, let me just say a word about Chadwick Boseman.
Okay.
Something that I am privy to know about him because of my access, physical access and relational access to people who were very dear to him.
Okay.
So I live in New York City. Uh, Mr. Boseman lived in New York City after graduating from Howard University. He got his start in acting in New York City.
Okay.
In Brooklyn. He lived in Brooklyn. And he attended the church that my next door neighbor pastors. Well, I remember, I guess it was maybe 2013, maybe 2012, 2013. I can't remember the year with certainty. That 42 came out.
13, I believe it was.
2013.
Yeah.
And what I remember was my next door neighbors telling me that he had rented out a theater and invited the entire church congregation to come see 42.
Wow.
And they sat in the theater and they watched 42 with him.
Mm.
And that he then continued to do that with every movie that followed. That he respected and appreciated the role that that church community played in his life, so much that when films would come out, he wanted to honor them by taking them to the theater to see it with him.
Wow.
Right? Like, we aren't hearing that.
No, we're not hearing that at all.
But what does that say about his character? What does that say about his centering on Christ?
Yes.
And his respect and appreciation for his community, his church community, and the role that they played in his life.
Yes.
How he must have believed they poured into him. And so in turn, he was going to honor them by giving back.
Wow.
Didn't have to do it.
No,
right?
no.
He didn't become a big time Hollywood actor and forget them. Right? So that says a lot about him. So my journey with cancer. Let's see, how do I do this in very, 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 very quick? Like a 5 minute, 3 minute, 4 minute.
Sure.
I told you that I'm a child and family advocate. We talked about how I came into this work and how I believe that God called me to work on behalf of his vulnerable children from the time that I was in law school. How I received that calling, and essentially in all the years since, I've been, on this journey of trying to work on behalf, serve, save, protect God's most vulnerable children. So that's what I've been doing from the early 1990s up until the time that I became ill in 2009. And essentially what happened was I woke up on a Friday morning in September, right around this time. I woke up with a flu-like fever. And I thought, okay, it's just your typical flu or, something like that. I'm going to pop some Tylenol and sleep it off. It's Friday morning, I did that. I went to work. The fever kept spiking. I'd take some Tylenol, it would drop, and then it'd come back again. Came home early, took off my clothes, put on my PJs, got in bed. My mother said to me, maybe you need to go to the doctor. And I said, no, it's just a flu. I'll be good with it. I'll be fine. Fever persisted through the night. I kept waking up, drenched in my own sweat, changing my PJs. Saturday morning comes, and my husband now says to me, it's time to go to the doctor. So now, having heard from my mother and my husband, and the fever, breaking, but continuing to spike, I go to the hospital. I go to the ER. I'm triaged in the ER. They tell me it's a virus.
Okay.
They tell me to take some Advil, go home, sleep it off. Doctor said that's what I should do. That's what I do. They never tested my blood. And I always tell people that whenever something just pops up out of nowhere and the Tylenol isn't working, you find yourself in the ER, you make sure they test your blood.
Wow. I
go home on a Saturday night. Sunday comes, the fever is still spiking up and down. Monday the same. And then Monday afternoon, I wake up and I am blind. I cannot see.
Okay.
That's when I knew that it was something more than a flu-like fever or run-of-the-mill typical virus type thing. Call my primary physician. She tells me to come in. I go in and see her. She takes one look at me and she says, I can't do anything for you. You got to go via ambulance to the hospital. Go back to the hospital, but now it's a different hospital. They begin to run a battery of tests on me, and they find out in about 24 hours that I have leukemia.
Okay.
It's a blood cancer.
Mm-hmm.
They tell me that if I have chemotherapy, most people do well with chemotherapy, and I'll be inconvenienced for 6 weeks, and everything should be fine. That was the last I heard. 10 days later, I find myself awakened from a coma that I was in. I learned that what happened was the cancer, a blood cancer, as I said, began running through my system. It entered my lungs, and my lungs began to shut down. This is about 24 hours after the diagnosis.
Okay.
The cancer, as it entered my lungs, began creating breathing difficulty. So the doctors intubated me. They put a tube down my throat to assist me with breathing. And they put me in a coma because my body was overheating from the fever trying to fight the leukemia. And they told my husband, 1 week from the day that I first fell ill, so on a Friday, 1 week from the Friday that I first became ill, they told my husband that I was going to die that weekend.
Mm.
They gave me a 1% chance of surviving the disease. What I like to tell people is that my family came together and they prayed for me, and they reached out to my church and my friends and extended family, and they prayed for me. And I'm told that the church community across the nation then got word that I was in trouble. Bill Jones's daughter was in trouble, and the church community began praying for me. And then the doctors in the hospital prayed too.
Okay.
And they determined, as there's a scripture that reads, faith without works is dead.
Mm-hmm.
They determined to give me chemotherapy thinking that I was going to die, but perhaps they'd learned something. And the chemotherapy worked.
Wow.
Fast forward, I survived the weekend. I come out of the coma, and the cancer's in remission. But now the doctors have told me that I have a rare form of leukemia, environmentally caused. I was in 9/11.
Wow.
Greater incidence of leukemia and other blood cancers among people who went through 9/11. And they tell me that I need a bone marrow transplant to survive the disease long term. They tell me that I'll most likely match with someone of the same race and ethnicity because you need to have similar genetic typing.
Okay.
I have 3 full-blooded siblings, same mom, same dad. They said, oh, you'll get a match from one of them. They get tested, and we quickly learned that they don't match me, but they match each other.
Wow.
Right? So the doctors say not to worry, that there's a bone marrow registry with better than 8 million people in it. And, surely there's going to be a match among 8 million people. They comb the registry, and within just days, they come back and tell me that there's not one match in that registry for me. My husband asked the doctors if we should do bone marrow drives to help find a match for me, where people come and they learn about a person in need. There is a swab of the cheek that's done, and then it's sent off to a lab to determine whether or not you may have similar genetic typing. And if you do, then you go through another series of tests. And if you are a compatible match with respect to genetic typing, then you can donate your bone marrow and create a new blood and bone marrow system in the person with the defunct blood and bone marrow system. Okay. So the doctors say that my husband shouldn't waste his time or my time, because if there are 8 million people and there's not a donor in that donor base, maybe we'll do drives, we'll get 100 to 200 people, but the likelihood that we'll find a match is very small. Fortunately, my husband was like, we're not going to let her die without trying. And so he led an army of family and friends. And in 13 weeks, they conducted more than 200 drives across the nation and registered more than 13,000 people. Great majority of them people of color, Black people, to be donors for me. And here's the beauty of this in this moment. I talked about social justice and my father, that you have a responsibility to your community. What I was seeing and what my children who were seeing at the young ages of 7 and 12 was community stepping forward to take care of community.
Wow.
Right? People who didn't know me, who were Black and brown, were trying to be a donor for me. Okay. All across this nation. What we quickly learned was that people who were in need of bone marrow transplants, other than myself, were actually now finding donors from the people who came forward to be a donor for me. And to date, we now have more than 100 people who have received transplants from donors who registered to be a match for me, proving to be a match for them.
Wow.
Here's what happened.
Okay.
Did not find a match
Okay.
among those 13,000 people. But I like to think that God has had something just for me.
Just for you.
Just for me. And here's why.
Uh-huh.
So I received a transplant.
Mm-hmm.
I received a cord blood transplant.
Okay.
Cord blood is the blood found in the umbilical cord blood of babies when they're born.
Okay.
It is the umbilical cord blood that is thrown in the trash when babies are born in many instances. Well, there are public cord blood banks where people donate their cord blood because cord blood has life-saving treatments.
Okay.
Cord blood can serve as the, what they call stem cell transplant for bone marrow transplantation. Here's what happened. I received a cord blood transplant from 2 babies. Now, you remember me saying that God purposed me to work on behalf of his vulnerable children.
Yes.
I do that for 20 plus years and then I become gravely ill.
Wow. Wow.
My siblings step up to be a match for me. They match each other, but they don't match me.
Okay.
8 million people in the registry, not one of them a match for me.
Mm.
We do donor drives.
Okay.
13,000 people added to the registry, and not one of them a compatible match for me. I received cord blood from 2 little boys,
Okay.
2 little Black boys born in New York City public hospitals.
Okay.
Now, who gives birth in a public hospital? It's usually people who are low income
True.
or no income,
Right.
who don't have private health insurance. The people who struggle in this nation, in this world, to put food on the table, to care for their children, right?
Right.
2 Black boys, the most dejected, the most marginalized, the most ostracized, the most institutionalized.
Mm.
So I like to think, I fervently believe that whereas I believed that I was doing the work, that God had called me to save and serve and protect his most vulnerable children, he was just setting me up. Because when I needed someone to save and protect me,
Right.
and give me new life, he sent the children. He sent 2 Black boys,
Wow.
the ones who are the most vulnerable in this nation. So that's my journey with cancer. And it's been 10 years.
Okay.
And I am holding tight. Thanks be to God. And I just fervently believe it's because he has work for me to do.
Right.
That's what this is all about. So I'm here trying to do it.
And, and as you say that, I came across a quote by you, and you said, "My journey with cancer helped me appreciate my life and my purpose. There is a reason for me being here. My voice has value. The best thing you can do for yourself is to live your purpose and be awake in the moment. When you run into adversity, see clarity and move with it." And in reading that, I think that you kind of capsulize your purpose and your journey. While I'm sure you never thought it would end, I mean, it would go the way that it went. And of course, I mean, to think that who comes to your rescue? The ones you've been rescuing throughout your whole career.
Absolutely. I tell people all the time that I pray for clarity.
Okay.
And I embrace my reality.
Okay. I like
And what
that.
I mean by that is I want always to have a clear mind that allows me to see things as they are, not just as I desire them, but as they are.
Yes.
Because if we live in a space where we're always just hopeful for something more, and we don't honor what is, then we can't get from what is to what we desire, because we're not really willing to embrace, our reality and what it takes to move to that other space.
Sure.
So praying for clarity and embracing your reality. And then also this appreciation that there is a reason for our struggle, right? That without struggle, there is no growth.
That's right.
Without challenge, we don't really understand what it means to dig deep and find resolve and find meaning.
Mm-hmm.
In my journey with cancer, everything from raising awareness about the importance of Black and brown persons becoming part of the bone marrow registry, to understanding that my suffering had purpose because other people were receiving bone marrow donors through our effort, to seeing how, again, the way I see it as a person of great faith, that God had been working this plan long before I got sick.
There you go.
That he had it all worked out.
That's
right.
right.
And all I had to do was lean in
Mm-hmm.
and just go with it, right? Be obedient and just try to kind of ride the wave. All of that has helped me to understand that I've got purpose and I've got value. And as long as I'm here, I'm supposed to live in it. People said to me, well, now that you've been through this, why don't you just go sit on the beach? You get to rest.
Right.
When God has brought you through something and has kept you,
Uh-huh.
I don't really think that he intends for you to just kind of sit it out now.
Right. Exactly.
He wants you to sit in.
Yes.
Right? Because you've got work to do, because he has given you more time, because he needs your voice in these spaces. So that's what I'm trying to do.
Well, you're doing a great job at it.
I'm trying.
And because of what you went through, that led you to write a book. And you put your story in your book. And the title of it is called Consider It Pure Joy. And it tells the harrowing account of your battle with a life-threatening illness, which is leukemia, and the power of faith and community to transform desperation into joy.
Absolutely.
So you put your life into book, and why did you feel that you needed to do that?
So when I was going through this journey,
Mm-hmm.
it was epic. And everybody who's been through cancer would say that the experience seemed epic or was epic, but this was by doctor's accounts epic.
Okay.
Like I said, it began with this like near-death experience, had a few other near-death experiences. It was, a lot of uncertainties along the way, having to come to terms with death, having to engage with and help my young children to appreciate, that mom might die, and working with them through that. Engaging with community, being very public about my illness because I needed somebody from the community to come forward to try and be a donor for me. As I was going through all of this, and there was just, so many people were involved. People kept saying to me, this story is gripping everybody, and everybody, they felt like it was a movement. And people kept saying, you need to write this story. You need to tell the story. And I was like, why?
Mm-hmm.
There are 1,001 books out there about cancer. I had at least 50 of them. And I thought, who needs another book about cancer? And then one day I realized that there was a story to be told.
Okay.
Unlike any that I had read as I was reading books to try to navigate this journey. I had not come across one book that spoke to the blessings, the actual joy,
okay,
that can be found in experiencing a life-threatening illness,
okay,
a challenge that just upends your life and causes you to appreciate that things may never be what they once were, and that you may actually no longer be.
mm-hmm.
And so I felt compelled to write the book because I believe that God wanted me to help people to understand that even in the midst of your greatest challenges, whether it be suffering a life-threatening illness, or the loss of your job, the loss of reputation, the loss of a family member, going through something traumatic and dare I say tragic, that
Hmm.
there can actually be growth and positivity in it. The book is titled Consider It Pure Joy, um, and is taken from the book of James in the Bible,
Hmm.
the first chapter,
Count it
which
all joy, right?
count it all joy, right?
That's
And
right.
so in the New International Version, it reads, "Consider it pure joy when you face trials and tribulations, because the testing of your faith produces perseverance.
Right.
Let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything."
Anything. That's
Right?
right. Hmm.
And when one day I read that, it was maybe about a year and a half into my recovery.
Okay.
I was like, oh, this is what that was all about. This is why I was able to smile through the pain.
Mm.
This is why I was able to see my children growing and benefiting in some ways from this illness. This
Hmm.
is why I saw, was able to see the positivity that was coming from community coming together,
Okay.
because God was showing me that even in the darkest of your days, joy can be found. And that in my, as a person of great faith, that he was walking with me and he had this.
Wow. You know that it's so inspirational, especially because, you know, when I was pastoring a church in New York, I always said to people that
You
the
didn't
word,
tell me you were pastoring a church.
I didn't get there yet. We'll talk about that. uh, I used to tell the congregation, while I know I'm preaching to you every Sunday, uh, but these words that I'm giving you are really for the times that you're going through. And when you're going through, that's when you need to lean on what you're hearing.
Amen.
It's not when things are going well. You got money in your pocket,
Yes.
you don't need it. The family is together, you don't need it.
Right.
Your health is right, you don't need it. Well, when you're going through hell, guess what? You need it.
That's right.
And you were able to lean on the scripture, consider it pure joy, what you're going
Amen.
through. And that gives you that faith to be able to handle what you probably within yourself could not.
Right. Well, Dr. Walker, my father used to preach um, uh, um, a sermon where he talked about the storms of life. And he
Hmm.
would say, everybody goes through storms.
Right.
You're either in one, coming out of one, or about to go through one.
Exactly.
And just as you prepare for, the hurricanes
Hmm.
and the superstorms, the tornadoes, and whatever other, natural, weather challenges that may present, you need to prepare for the storms in life. And
That's
how
right.
do you best prepare? But by, staying, well fed when it comes to scripture,
That's right.
and and your walk with God.
Hmm.
Because if you don't have that base,
Hmm.
when that quake comes, when that earthquake hits,
That's right.
right, you're gonna be off kilter.
That's right.
But if you have that base,
That's right.
it allows you to see the storm
Hmm.
as just, was that old your spiritual, the storm is passing
Passing
over.
over. That's
The
right.
storm is passing over, right?
Hmm. Hmm. Absolutely.
You know what I'm talking about.
Oh, absolutely. Um, as I was listening to, all that you have done in your, in your life and primarily in your professional life, you're helping children, you're an advocate for families, advocate for children, you're fighting the cause of social justice. But I want to ask you, with all the work that you've done, are there any regrets or disappointments about something that you were not able to get done? And what would that be? I said you help children, you've done, but is it something that it just didn't happen and you wished it had? It's just a disappointment about it? I don't know. You let me know.
There have been times, and still presenting times when I wonder, did I advocate fiercely enough?
Okay.
I got something, but did I get enough? Right?
Gotcha. Gotcha.
Like we got 50 million, but maybe I should have pushed for 80 million and held firm. We got, something like raise the age, but we got it with conditions on, juvenile, how young persons are, engaged with when it comes to criminal judicial proceedings.
Okay.
Did we go far enough? I've had those experiences, but I would say that nobody's ever asked me this question, so you almost stumped me for a moment, but I'm actually going to share with you something personal.
Okay.
That I've just really come to terms with in recent years. So when I was in law school, I mentioned to you that I discovered my calling while searching for a law review note topic.
Okay.
And so a law review note is a body of work. It's about 150 pages on average. That is it's an analysis and of law on a particular matter, and presenting how that law has been interpreted and what can or should be done differently, that type of thing. Well, I wrote a note about parricide, child abuse and parricide, and the laws concerning child abuse and parricide, and what I believed, should be done differently.
Okay.
I had two professors who were my advisors for the note. One was a Black woman who went on to become a federal district court judge.
Okay.
And the other was a white male professor who is still a professor. They both read the note in its final stages. The Black female professor returned it to me and told me it was a great body of work.
Okay.
She had some edits that she thought I should make, and they were very helpful, but she thought it was a tremendous piece of work.
Okay.
The white male professor handed it back to me, and when I tell you I could not see the words that I typed for all the red ink that he'd marked up my paper with.
Okay.
He caused me to believe that I could not write to save my soul. Fast forward, I never went forward with that note, and I never published it. I allowed a white man to make me believe that I could not. There I had a Black professor who, as I said, went on to become a federal district court judge, which is pretty darn impressive.
Sure.
Who told me that I had a strong body of work. But the white man, because he said it wasn't good enough, I believed I couldn't. And that was back in 1992.
Okay.
Can I tell you that for a good 20 plus years, every time I went to write something that had to be published, I had a knot in my stomach, a lump in my throat. How would people receive it?
Right.
Would they question? Would they judge me? Would they think that I couldn't string two sentences together?
Right.
That was my fear.
Right.
Because I allowed someone else to validate or to invalidate me, to say that I couldn't. And it wasn't until like the late teens, like 20 teens, that I began developing the confidence to write and to put my work out there. And so I've been writing ever since. So my greatest regret, if I, as I think about it, is that I allowed someone who, whatever his issues may have been, that he would engage with me the way that he did, not in a constructively critical way, but in a way that sought to just tear me down, deface me, and just essentially wipe out whatever confidence I had, that I allowed that to happen. I lost a lot of time.
Yeah. And your words are so powerful because what you have just described is, if the wrong person speaks into your ear, speaks into your spirit, speaks into your mind, it can take you in the wrong direction, because
Absolutely.
apparently you allowed him to have value, which
Absolutely.
he should not have had. And so many people have gone through that. So hearing that from you, because we would look at your work and we would not have expected that would have been a disappointment, because someone spoke into your mind and your spirit and told you you couldn't.
Right.
You know, and how valuable is it for us as African Americans, as Black people, children and adults, to be reinforced, because there's so much negativity that we get and receive, that no wonder so many have not achieved what they should because of who's talking to them.
Absolutely. And let's add that, yeah, let's just call it, I mean, something that not until this moment I've ever thought about it in this way.
Mm-hmm.
Was there an element of internalized racism and internalized sexism?
Right.
Why did I think that the white man's,
Mm-hmm.
assessment of my work was of greater value than the Black woman?
Right.
Why did his opinion matter more than did hers?
Right.
Right? Now, maybe it was just simply negative feedback that I was challenged in, kind of getting beyond.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe there was an element
Mm-hmm.
of, well, she's my Black woman, and he's the white male, and he's the power authority, or the
Right.
power figure.
Right.
But, I need to unpack that.
Absolutely.
Especially in today's world. I mean, if you say to me, what are some of my greatest challenges today?
Mm-hmm.
In leadership, I find that white men
Okay.
and Black women
Okay.
are my greatest challenges.
Okay.
White women wanting to box me.
Uh-huh.
Who is she to think that she has a voice?
Okay.
And then Black women, I think sometimes as we continue to struggle with our place in our space and how we are received, perceived and received,
Mm-hmm.
Who am I to think as a Black woman that I do have a voice when we're consistently being told that we don't?
Right.
So I get it from both ends. The Black woman who wants to tell me, well, no, you really aren't all that.
Mm-hmm.
And the white man who wants to put me in my place.
That reminds me of the, the greatest tool that we all have is our mind.
Mm-hmm.
How you allow your mind to process things is always whether or not you gain or you lose.
Right.
If I could just throw a quick story in, I'm a part of a speaking organization, and they were given an opportunity for new speakers to have a platform in this upcoming conference. And when they sent the application for you to participate, when I looked at what they wanted, the requirements that you had to submit in order for your application to be accepted as a new speaker, I realized that I didn't have all that I needed.
Okay.
And what I did was I said to myself, well, I don't have everything they want, so I'm not going to send in the application. So 2 days after the deadline, I heard Karen Hunter on her show.
Okay.
She was talking about how, as a professor at her school, she was looking for, I guess, an intern. And she said, I wasn't sure whether she said this to herself or whether she told the students, the first one that submits their resume, I'm going to give the job to.
Wow.
She probably said that to herself, seeing who would be first. So she says that 2 or 3 people who she thought would submit an application, they didn't.
Okay.
Because they said, well, I don't have everything, so I'm not going to submit the application.
Okay.
But based on Karen Hunter's assessment of what she was going to do, if they had been one of the first ones or the first one to hand it in, whether or not they had all the qualification, it didn't matter.
Wow.
She was going to hire them. And so when I heard that, I said to myself, you just talked yourself out of the possibility that although you didn't have everything you needed, someone still could have accepted it. Someone still could have given you an opportunity, but because you chose to believe you weren't qualified, you didn't have everything you needed, you canceled yourself out. So I'm guaranteed of not getting in because I didn't submit the application, versus sometimes, as someone told me, start ugly. You don't have everything, but just go ahead. You don't have everything they need, but submit the application anyway, because you never know where favor is.
Amen.
So that,
Amen.
so it is about your mindset. Your mindset, if your mindset says you can, guess what? You can.
Absolutely.
If you start believing you don't have the qualifications or the ability, which is what we receive a lot.
Yes.
And of course, with Chadwick Boseman, an HBCU grad, becoming a legendary movie star, Kamala Harris, an HBCU grad, is about to potentially become a national presidential person. When they told us that if you went to those schools, you didn't have what it takes, but they're turning it around now. Thank the Lord.
Absolutely. Hey, here we're about to, if it's the Lord's will, what we're about to see, is a complete upending of what has been the status quo. I heard recently that never before, I should say not never before, but in the last, I can't remember how many, but it was at least 50 or 70 years have we had a president and a vice president ticket where there is no representation of Ivy League at the undergraduate or graduate level. So between both Biden and Harris.
Where did Biden go?
I don't know, but he did not go to an Ivy League.
Okay, didn't go Ivy League. Okay.
Right. And so what it was really saying is this is a big shift.
Absolutely.
And how wonderful is that in a society where people have been made to believe that if you didn't go Ivy, you weren't smart enough.
You weren't smart enough. Absolutely. Absolutely. And they are clearly showing that it's not the truth.
Absolutely. Well, look, I'm a firm believer, and I tell people this all the time. Every time I hear somebody say, and he went to Harvard. Oh, and she went to Columbia. As if that is this validator.
Right.
I tell people, and especially in our Black communities, stop that.
Mm-hmm.
Because really what it's an indication of in many instances is not superiority in intellect,
right,
or in ability. Very often it's just the path that you were on or the resources available to you.
Mm-hmm.
You take the Black child who grows up in the household where education is everything and people are able to carve out that space for that child to study and be educated, and you could put that same child in a household where poverty is a factor and they don't have stability in their housing, right? And mom can't buy the resources or the tutorial support. Doesn't mean one child is mentally more prepared or more able than the other.
Right.
It's just a matter of circumstance. Sometimes it's simply that in some households it doesn't have to be that you went Ivy. You just go to college.
That's right.
But when we feed into this narrative of that you have to be at these top schools, then we ourselves perpetuate that falsehood.
The same thing.
And we set our children up for failure.
Absolutely. And I totally agree. As we begin to draw this wonderful conversation to a close, what are you currently focused on? Are you working on anything in particular?
A couple of things.
Okay.
Right now, in this moment, I am very much centered on ending solitary confinement in New York City.
Okay.
It's a big challenge. The desire is there on the part of many. The need to do it is, undeniably evident. In so many spaces and places, just the harm, the mental and emotional harm that solitary confinement does to people who've been incarcerated, it's too great to be ignored. But there are a lot of challenges in working with people who want to make sure that jails are kept safe. And we have to balance the concerns and the interests of people who are monitoring and working in the jails.
Okay.
So solitary confinement is first and foremost in terms of stuff we've got to get done.
Okay.
I'm also very much centered on making sure that in this moment of reckoning, concerning social justice and equity in our society, racial equity, that we not achieve reform significant or marginal when it comes to policing and think that we're done. I'm very much concerned about everybody being so excited about how this movement appears to be diverse when it comes to race and ethnicity. But it's also really centered on police reform.
Right.
And this appreciation that if we really want to address racial equity, we have to look at it in every facet of our society, from income and wages and wealth attainment to housing and education and healthcare and mental health care and community, that we have to look at it and appreciate what that means to really achieve true equity. It means that people with privilege have to let go of some of their privilege.
Right.
Because we want to say the pie is but so big. So I'm really centered on that. Okay. And then I'm about to put out a new book that is titled God in the Ghetto, A Prophetic Word Revisited. And it is a book that my father authored.
Yes.
Back in the late 70s, which really tells the story of the intersection of race and religion in our society.
Okay.
It has persisted, and it's a work that has been applauded and heralded for decades. And people said, we need to have this book out here again. And so I am going to do a reprint.
Oh.
And with some contemporary responses.
Very nice.
Including, Al Sharpton, Jim Forbes, who headed the Riverside Church.
Yes.
Dr. William Barber of the
From Carolina.
People's Campaign. And a foreword by Michael Eric Dyson.
Woo!
So, this book will be in print in the spring, and I'm really excited about that. And then I might go back and write another book.
There you go.
Yeah.
Very nice. So tell us how we get the current book that you have. I think that's something that everyone needs to get in their hands. Consider it Pure Joy. Tell us where we can get that.
You can go on Amazon.
Okay.
Or JenniferJonesAustin2018.com.
All right. And is there any other social media information you'd like to share?
You can find me on Instagram at Jennifer Jones Austin. And I'm also on Twitter, Pure Joy, at Pure Joy. I don't tweet as much as some tell me I should, but you can find me there.
All right. Well, Jennifer, I want to take this opportunity to thank you for coming on the show today. You have enlightened us. You have inspired us, with your story and your journey. You have told us and shown us how you can recover from life's tragedies and life's difficulties and life's disappointments. And that, when there's a will, there's a way. And of course, with faith and family and love, any and everything is possible.
Amen. Amen.
Yeah. And I just want to say, as I say to all my guests, you have gone beyond the culture.
Oh, I appreciate it.
And we thank you for being on.
The joy is all mine.
Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
All right. Take care. Now, if you want to continue to hear inspiring interviews like the one you heard today, I want you to subscribe to this podcast on iTunes. Also, rate the show and please leave a comment. I would also love it if you would share this podcast with your friends to let them know that we're on. Finally, please go to our website at www.beyondtheculturepodcast.com, or you can email me at beyondtheculturepodcast@gmail.com. On the website, you can subscribe to the show and connect with me by leaving your email address. I'd love to hear from you. This is your host, Dr. David Walker, and we'll talk again on Beyond the Culture. Take care.